The following talk was given at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California. Please visit our website at audiodharma.org.
So I'll continue today the series of talks I'm giving on the discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness. As I've been saying, it's considered to be the original text, original teachings that lays the foundation for mindfulness practice. And it goes back to supposedly to the Buddha. And it's a wonderful text. It has a wonderful series of exercises for cultivating mindfulness, cultivating a heightened sense of awareness. And it begins with a series of exercises around mindfulness of the body. And we'll continue that today with another one of the focuses on how to be mindful of your physical embodied experience. And as a way of introducing it, I want to say that our bodies are pretty precious. That it's easy to take it for granted or to ignore it. And the degree to which our body supports us and carries us physically in a sense, you can say, but it also carries so much of our suffering. If you didn't have a body, you wouldn't know you were suffering so much. You know, you would be mentally distressed maybe, but to feel pangs of grief in the heart, or the tightness of anger in the belly, or to feel the weight of our sadness and all these different emotions we have, being hurt. So much is felt in the body. And the body never asked for it. And the body, just holds it, receives it, bees it. And so much of it has its genesis in our minds. What we tell ourselves, how the mind receives the experiences of the world and interprets it and makes meaning out of it or something. And the mind reacts certain ways, and it's like in the Buddhist image is that the mind is kind of like a puppeteer with strings that go down into the muscles. And so the mind tugs on different of those strings, and then we feel tense or tight or hot or something in different places in our body. And so the body, holds and experiences so much of our suffering. And to speak about it that way, as if the body was kind of separate from ourselves, in a sense it holds our suffering and experiences it, is to step back a little bit and try to get a little different perspective on it than we usually have, and maybe see it in a different way. And it's possible to experience the body as something vibrant and alive and pleasant, and that's quite wonderful to experience and feel and be within. And a lot of that vibrancy and aliveness of the body is best experienced without a lot of stories about it, without a lot of judgments and commentary and ideas, but it's to take time to experience the physicality, the embodied experience in and of itself. Just allow it to kind of emerge and be there and be present and vibrate. And there can be something very deeply satisfying about doing that. But how often do we allow ourselves to do that? To feel the goodness that's there? Some of the first lessons I had when I started meditating many years ago was I had a lot of physical pain when I meditated. And I struggled with the pain, tried to sit there with it and be present with it best I could. And sometimes it was quite excruciating, my pain. And I didn't know that I could move somehow. You're supposed to just sit there with it. And I was glad that I didn't know I could move, because at the time I wasn't happy, but I learned such important life lessons from staying with it, the physical pain I had. And one of the really important things I learned was my mind's relationship to the pain. The stories I told myself about the pain. And one of the ones that I used to have that really would get me hooked into it, or I would kind of almost like I would sink into it and just feel that pain so much worse, is when I told myself stories of self-pity. Poor Gil. And I would just get pulled into that, and it was, then it got much more acute, the pain. And there was kind of no separation from it. It's kind of like I sank into it, or was like sinking into mud or quicksand or something. And I learned that if I could kind of not do the self-pity thing and just sit and experience the pain without it, it was a lot easier. I learned that when I hated the pain, the hate of the pain made it actually worse. And sometimes I think the little micro muscles around the place I felt pain would just tighten up a little bit with the hate. And so I learned that if I, could stop hating it, that it was just a lot easier. And sometimes it was manageable, the pain. I learned about fear, and how that fear would operate. I'd have feel pain, and I'd filled with fear. And because I was practicing in a meditation center where we weren't supposed to move, it was compounded by fear that if I moved, I would be ostracized by the community. Everyone else was sitting, but be still. And so the fear would operate, and certainly there was physical pain just from the fear, but that also involved a kind of getting glued onto it, or overly identified with it, or kind of overly entangled with the fear. I was caught in its grip, or I was caught in its web or something. And I learned that if I wasn't afraid, that it was much more manageable. And so I learned to kind of settle the fear, relax the fear, and not believe it. And got this. I had a lot of experience going back and forth, because I would get pulled into it, and then I would pull myself out somehow, and that was fine for a second and a half. And then I'd get pulled into it, and try to be there, and slowly I learned some distance from it. And I learned also, one of the interesting lessons was these stories we tell ourselves. So we don't know we're telling ourselves stories, but we often have a framework, a perspective, an idea of what it's all about, that really is just a story that's kind of maybe so deeply internalized we don't even see it as a story. And sometimes I would play around with coming up with a unique new story and see what that effect would have. And one of them, I remember I had sometimes migraines, and I wasn't meditating, but I was migraine in bed with the migraine. And, and self-pity operated big time, and all kinds of things operated there. And, but, it also, the other thing that operated was a story that this really hurts. This is bad. That's, it was reasonable. I don't want to belittle it, how painful it'd be for some people. It is sometimes pretty bad. I was laying in bed, so I don't go to bed easily around pain, right? So there I was in bed with my migraine. And then I thought, why don't I change this? And what if I imagine all this pain, sharp pain I feel in my head, what if it's just simply growing pains? Like somehow I'm just stretching and getting bigger. My brain is getting bigger, or greater capacity. And this is the cost of kind of stretching into great new capacity. So I'd lay there imagining, stretching, and it wouldn't feel so bad. It's like, oh yeah, this is great. This is good. I can live with this because it's going to be good stuff is happening. I'm getting a better person because of it. And you're laughing at me. And it is kind of silly, right? I mean, it's kind of silly to think, However, it made a difference. It wasn't so bad. So what's the pain? Is the pain real? Is the pain, the intensity of the pain, like a fixed thing? Like the universe has a fixed intensity of pain, and I have that fixed intensity of migraine, and that's what I have to live with as long as the universe is like pushing that button. It's fixed. Or is the intensity of pain variable? depending on many factors, depending on also the story I'm telling myself. If I'm telling myself self-pity stories, if I'm sinking into it, oh, this is hopeless, this is bad, it's terrible, what a bad day, I'm ruined, that's kind of a story. Maybe it's true enough. Let's say it's 100% true. So you're kind of justified to tell yourself that story. But if you stop telling yourself the story, maybe made up another story that was better, the intensity wouldn't be so bad. So, if you're about to throw up from the migraine, and if you tell yourself a different story and then you feel much better, what's the best medicine? Go along with the true story about how horrible and depressing and bad it is? It's bad enough. It's possible to change the story, the ideas, the mental landscape that we have in relationship to what goes on in our body, and it makes a difference. I'm not advocating that we should always go make up new stories, but it's a dramatic lesson of how much what goes on in the mind affects what we experience in the body. What we can learn to do with mindfulness practice is not just make up new stories, creative stories in order to feel better, but we can learn that we don't have to tell the stories. We don't have to operate around some of the interpretations, some of the perspectives that we're operating under. And some of those perspectives we have, a lot of them have to do with me, myself, and mine. Poor me. I really blew it. I knew that I should not have eaten that food that I'm allergic to, and now I'm having migraine, and I just really am a lousy food eater. And so we tell ourselves a story that kind of like depressing and kind of makes it worse. But what happens if we just sit there and practice mindfulness instead, a kind of a use of attention, a focus of attention that tries to see things in and of themselves independent of interpretations, independent of predictions, independent of a story that connects it to me, myself, and mine. It becomes a different body we live in. And the whole experience of being in a body can shift dramatically. So I want to do a little exercise with you to give you a sense of this. Maybe I did this recently, so you'll forgive me if I just did it. I did it somewhere recently. So, did I do the hand thing here? No, I didn't. If you did it, it doesn't hurt to do it again. So I think all of us here have hands, and some people have a relationship to their hands. If their hands are getting older, they remember when it was younger, and the hand's getting older. Or the hand is too chubby, or too thin, or too short, or too long, or too wrinkled, or too this, or too that, too many freckles, too many age spots. All kinds of, and it's pretty easy to kind of feel like something's not quite right with the hands. So I don't know, some of you hopefully haven't gone on thinking about your hands too much like this, but you can have ideas about hands or some other body part. There's a lot of suffering in the world about body parts. That somehow they're too big, they're too small, they're too long, they're too short, too much, too little, too wide, too narrow. Just just go on and on, right? And people get depressed and upset and worse, and some people really pulls them down when they think about their body. So if you close your eyes and take your right hand and try not to think about it, any ideas you have about your hand. Instead, how does the hand experience itself? What are the sensations that are showing up in the hand? Is there any tingling or vibration or warmth or coolness? Is there pulsing? What are the sensations on the palm of the hand? And are there whatever sensations in the palm of the hand, do they stay fixed or are they dancing and flashing in and out? What happens in the back of the hand? Are there different sensations in the back than in the front of the hand? Then the fingers, what happens there? So feeling the sensations of the hand, if you really feel intimately the sensations of the hand, you probably don't feel any boundaries, sharp lines, boundary to the hand, edges of the hand. You might have some general sense of where the edges are, but there's no sharp edges, diffuse, with your eyes closed. And you might feel that the sensations of your hand just appear, come and they go, and vibrate and pulse, the vibrancy of it. There might be some aching, but without any just stories, just ache, bouncing around. Chances are, because of the focus of this exercise, you're much more aware of the sensations of your hand than you would have been if I just kept talking and gave a riveting talk, and you wouldn't have noticed your hand, thought about your hand for minutes, the whole time maybe. But now there's lots of sensations. As you feel those sensations of your hand, the sensations themselves, in and of themselves, do they contain within them any of your judgments and ideas, concepts about you have about your hand? And I hope you say no. Sensations are, in and of themselves, are just vibrating and pulsing and doing their thing, quite independent from this is an old hand or new hand or big hand, small hand, or it's just sensations. Vibrancy and aliveness of sensations. With your hands, with your eyes still closed, put your hand down. What would happen to you if you experienced your body this way? Almost like experiencing your body from the inside out. The body's experience of itself, the sensations of your body pulsing and vibrating and tingling and appearing and disappearing, separate and distinct from any judgments and ideas of your body, any thoughts about what's wrong with your body or even what's right with your body. Just the vibrancy of physical sensations in your body. And to the degree to which you can feel the physical sensations of your body in and of itself, and feel the simplicity of that, the immediacy of your physical sensations in your body, and you're not carrying with you a lot of the baggage of your judgments and thoughts and stories and comparisons to other people and everything, just the body by itself. What are some of the baggage, extra things that you've put down for these few minutes about your body? What's not operating? When all you're doing is feeling the aliveness and tingling and sensations pulsing of your body. Can you notice some of the things that for these few minutes you weren't operating? That thoughts you had about your body. And so we can end the exercise, you can open your eyes. So, if some of you would be willing to say, could you notice that the difference between just sensing your body in and of itself versus some of the baggage through which you usually interpret the body or judge it or something? And what was put aside for those few minutes to just experience the body that was a lot easier than experiencing it with your judgments and stories and you have? Anybody want to share what was put down a little bit? Yes, please.
I was able to feel my body relax in a way that I haven't relaxed physically in quite a while.
So you became relaxed just feeling the sensations in and of themselves. Fantastic. So there was no tension that you're used to having.
Yeah.
Other things you noticed about that, and what was not operating that might usually often be operating and makes it more difficult, your relationship to your body?
My ideas about my emotional state disappeared.
A little bit louder.
My ideas about my emotional state disappeared. It was just
your ideas
sensation.
about your emotional state. So you still had an emotional state, but
well, I had sensations.
You had sensations that, yes. And so this is also interesting, the idea to which we can have emotions often come with sensations, but we make up stories and ideas about what those emotions are, and then we have a relationship with those emotions, and they have meaning and purpose and all kinds of things. And it gets a complicated little universe in there. It's not. Some of the stuff is not required. You're not required to make it so complicated. Maybe a couple of more if you're willing. Over here.
I sensed fullness in the, such a word, more fullness.
More fullness.
My hand, especially my hand, it's not so much my body, but my hand just felt larger because I was aware of more things going on there than normal.
Great. So the fullness of it all. And so in feeling that fullness, what do you, if you're willing to say something, you can say something minor, but what happens in your mind when you're reflecting about your body where you lose the fullness?
I think it's just it's a lack of attention to the hand or the body. By putting the attention on it, I experience more things going on, and it just enters my mind as though it were an expansion.
Great, beautiful. So then right next to you.
I was just going to say I felt like my thoughts felt much more real when my body sort of receded to the background. And it was kind of interesting to be like, no, the body is what's real, and then it felt like the mind went into the background.
So the more you're in your body, the thoughts that you have aren't so substantial or so strong or so invested in, and they don't dominate.
Exactly.
And if you're like most people, chances are your thoughts are not 100% accurate. Okay, great. So I hope that gave you some sense. So it's possible to experience one's body in different ways. One can experience it through the filter or the lens of our concepts and ideas. And it's also possible to drop those concepts and ideas and experience it much more in the immediacy of the sensations as they occur. If we have concepts of it all, those concepts might not be so accurate or so useful. One of the less useful ones from a Buddhist point of view are concepts that have a lot to do with me, myself, and mine. The conceit, for example, around the body, ideas of what it means for me, all kinds of, I'm in the body, the body defines me, overly identified with the body. And that has its own suffering to do that. If we want to cultivate the heightened awareness of mindfulness, we have to somehow put down always experiencing our life through the filter, through the lens of all these concepts and ideas and conceits and me, myself, and mine and predictions that we have, and start being willing to be much more simple and direct. not only so we can feel the fullness, not only of the sensations, but the more fullness we can feel of our experience, the immediacy of it, the richer and bigger, in a sense, awareness is, the more lucid it becomes. That lucid awareness gets clouded over when we start living in these thoughts and ideas and concepts we have, which are, usually less than 100% accurate. But more importantly, they're not needed all the time. What this practice of 4 foundations of mindfulness that the Buddha taught, he is really interested in taking awareness, cultivating it strong for a particular purpose. In modern society, where we teach, mindfulness is taught almost everywhere now, mindfulness is being presented as something that's useful in everyday life, which it is. And it's supposed to be applicable in all situations. You bring mindfulness and it helps you out. I think the Buddha would have been happy with saying that, but he was actually interested in this text in using mindfulness to cultivate a very heightened kind of awareness that's not really so useful for walking around in everyday life and filling out your taxes and getting your car oil changed card, figuring out what to buy at the supermarket. He wanted to develop such a heightened sense of awareness that the mind, or how we perceive the experience, becomes very, very, very simple. Without a lot of concepts and ideas and judgments, just the simplicity of the experience in the moment. Not because we're supposed to live that way all the time, but because in meditation, especially, if you can have this very radical simplicity of just the immediacy of the experience, that turns out to be a very good means to cultivate a very stable, peaceful, equanimous mind. A mind that is not troubled by anything. A mind which is not bothered by anything. Mind that's not being pushed around by desires and wanting something. A mind that's not being pushed around by aversion and not wanting things. And to be able to drop into a mind that has that level of peace and equanimity and stillness, it really helps not to be spinning around a lot of these thoughts and concepts and judgments that we have. And if we can have that level of equanimity and stillness of the mind, that's when we can discover something about the mind's capacity for a radical experience of not clinging to anything, not being attached to anything. And that is very healing. It's a very powerful lesson that our mind, that we take kind of for granted, that it is the way it is, has a potential for a wonderful sense of happiness and peace that's independent of anything at all. Our happiness is not dependent on winning the lottery or getting a good partner or having a good job or having, there's a radical, deep sense of satisfying, nourishing happiness, well-being that can come from this deep letting go. That's what the Buddha was really pointing at. So in this 4 foundations of mindfulness practice, he's presenting these ways of being mindful, of paying attention, that's supportive for getting to that place. The exercise I'm going to talk about today, I think it's the 6th exercise in the body section, is called mindfulness of the elements. That's how it's usually translated into English. Dhatus in Pali, Buddhist language. And before I tell you what these 4 elements are, I'll tell you the simile that the Buddha gives after he describes them. He says it's like a butcher. This is the ancient world. This is back in the Bronze Age, so a long time ago. A butcher who there's a dead cow on the road. somehow. That's what somehow they say in the road. They didn't have refrigeration then, so they. And the butcher slices up the cow to make all these cuts, then lays them all out so people can come and buy the cow, buy meat. Once the cow is cut open and cut up in all these pieces, the butcher doesn't see a cow anymore, just sees the individual cuts of meat. Distinct, the cow doesn't exist anymore. So it's a rather maybe unfortunate simile for us. But it's possible that rather than seeing ourselves as Gil or as myself, me, myself, and mine, it's a magnet for so many complicated ideas. My history and my future and what people like of me and don't like of me, and am I going to be rejected? And once it's this me thing, it's like quickly depressing. But what about if we don't think that way? Is there some other way of experiencing ourselves? And so the Buddha says you can start focus on yourself, on the experience here, and experience not the self who's suffering, not the self who's happy, but experience the sensations, moment-to-moment living immediacy of sensations in themselves. And just like maybe a butcher cuts the cow in 4 pieces, so for us there are 4 elements, there are 4 categories of sensations that we can experience physically. And to start tuning into the sensation level of all this is a means to experience fullness, a means to begin putting down and reorienting ourselves so we're not so oriented through the concepts and judgments, and get the benefit of feeling the vibrancy and the immediacy and fullness of life in the simplicity of the experience. So there are 4 elements, and there's earth, water, fire, and air. And people who teach this will often say that this is an ancient kind of physics, that this is the elements of the world, it's how it's all built up on these 4 things, like atoms or something. The way that it's usually understood in Buddhism is that these are sensations that we experience. So the earth element are those sensations of solidity that we have in our body, hardness and solidity. Anything that's hard and solid in the body is the earth element. That anything that's liquid or fluid or cohesive, that holds things together like sticky stuff, that's the water element. The fire element is anything has to do with temperature. And the movement, air, is anything to do with movement. So the blood moving through the veins, the heart beating. Anytime you move, if you're walking or something, there's the movement of air, like the wind, is that we say that's the movement is the air element. The word dhatu, which is translated as element, it probably shouldn't be translated as element, because then we think we're talking about ancient kind of, physics. The word is used for many other things. Equanimity is a dhatu, renunciation is a dhatu, wisdom is a dhatu. I think a better translation for dhatu is a quality. There are different qualities of experience we can have, or maybe even characteristics. And so we have these different characteristics of experience. And physically we can experience these level of sensations. The way that mindfulness practice was taught in Burma, at the preeminent, there was one particular teacher and place in Burma from which the modern mindfulness movement exploded. It had a kind of the place that started was in the 1940s, and from there, that monastery produced hundreds of meditation monasteries in Burma and the rest of the world, and started by a teacher named Mahasi Sayadaw, kind of my grandfather in the Dharma. And then when he taught this mindfulness practice, he was teaching a 4 elements meditation. That was his primary focus on what the meditation was about. And it looked like he was telling us to focus on breathing, and he'd have us focus on our abdomen, and as we breathed, we'd feel the lifting and falling of the abdomen, the movement of the abdomen as we were breathing. But it wasn't supposed to be the breathing we're focusing on. We're supposed to focus on these 4 elements, the sensations, and really tune into the sensations that are at play when the belly is moving. The pressure, the hardness, the tension, the release, the movement, the lightness, the temperature, all these different things that are coming into play. And as the idea was to tune into that more and more, and if something else arose elsewhere in the body, to do the 4 elements meditation there, to really feel the sensations of it. If we went to see our teacher and said, I had a lot of pain, it was hard, it was depressing, I'm always having a hard time in my life, and he didn't want to hear you. He basically sent you back to your cushion to meditate more. What he wanted to hear was, I was sitting, and there was a lot of burning sensations in my knee. I felt it as burning. I felt it as tension and tightness. And as I started feeling it, it started to dissolve some of the hard solidity of it, and it became more of a tingling, vibrating flow of temperature. When we came and told them, I'm having such a hard time, and I'm always having a hard time, and here I'm having a hard time again, it has to do with my parents. That's going off into the story. That's going in the opposite direction, into a more complicated world, which has some truth to it, has a time and place where that needs to be looked at. But it's not the direction that this practice was focused on when we're trying to get to this deep place of peace and equanimity, that we're learning to put down these things. We're learning this radical lesson that we don't have to always experience ourselves through the filter of the standard concepts and ideas that we're operating under. And some of those have to do with me, myself, and mine. And it's a radical thing to do, to learn a whole other, it's like learning a different language of how to experience ourselves through just the sensations, the simplicity of sensations. And so to just meditate and close the eyes and just feel the immediacy of sensations, independent of what it means that they're having those sensations, independent on it being you who's experiencing them, independent on where it's going, independent of any interpretation or concept. Just the simplicity of it. It's hard, I think, to be convinced that this is important and useful to do, but there's a lot of lessons from that. A really important life lesson is to start seeing really clearly the influence of these stories and ideas we have, the concepts. Because they're often quite invisible to ourselves, how much they're operating, and how much they cause our difficulties and suffering. And to be able to do this exercise, we're trying intentionally not to focus on them, to focus on sensations, just sensations. As we get better at it, then we start noticing much more clearly the difference between the sensations and the overlay of thoughts and concepts that can creep in. And to be able to see that distinction and see concepts and stories for themselves, rather than having them be invisible, is a fantastic life lesson. It gives us a lot of freedom, a lot of actually choice, a lot of power. It's very empowering to do that. To not see the story's interpretation is actually disempowering, because we don't see where we have choice. We're just kind of stuck in this world that we're kind of constructing. It also is very powerful to be able to have an experience of well-being, of peace, that's experienced independent of all these stories and ideas we have and identities that we live in. And it's very powerful because it sets the stage for this very peaceful, equanimous mind that the Buddha was hoping people would cultivate and develop. This very simple, I guess I shouldn't say simple mind, that no one will come back to meditate again. But a very simple experience, so that the mind can start discovering it can relax more, it can let go more. So these 4 elements, these 4 qualities or characteristics of our sensations, and to tune into them tune into our experience here in the sensation level, and to feel the fullness of it. So if you're experiencing your breathing, all the sensations that are coming into play as you breathe. If you have a headache, all the sensations of your headache, as opposed to poor me. If you're feeling warm, all the sensations of warmth, all the detailed manifestations of the warmth. You know, how it flashes in and out and moves around and does all this stuff. And it becomes a rich, interesting world to get absorbed in that and focus on that and be with it. So that's one of the important exercises in this 4 Foundations of Mindfulness texts. I've known people who absolutely love doing this, focusing on this. Some of the people I've known who love it a lot, love it because they feel it connects them very deeply with the natural world. The earth, water, fire, and air. And somehow they feel that there's this kind of intimacy with the natural world that's in themselves. The people I know who really kind of love the natural world, going for hikes and being with it, and to realize that what they're experiencing in these sensations is kind of like the natural world as it appears and manifests in us. And they find it very, very comforting to feel that and be that and experience it. So that was my effort to try to convey how this is an important way of cultivating mindfulness practice. And then I will go on from here as we go through this text, all these different exercises and the approaches for cultivating mindfulness. So thank you, and I hope you will spend this week enjoying your body by not thinking so much about it, but feeling it instead. Thank you.